Hello, uh, a very warm welcome to you all. My name's Teresa Piacentini. I am the Sociology 1A course convener. Um, I hope you've had the chance to watch the welcome message from Matt, where he introduces the idea of thinking a bit sociologically about this very moment that we're in, the reason why we're delivering lectures to you online, the context of COVID, the pandemic, its impacts, and the kind of inequalities that it's brought even more to the surface, and how all of that makes us feel. And these are really important questions when we're studying the subject of sociology. And what I'll be doing in this recording is delving a bit deeper into what we mean by thinking sociologically and developing sociological imagination. So the first thing to really say about sociology is it is a discipline, it is a subject we study, but the first thing really is that sociology is a way of seeing. And these quotes here, I think, capture some of that disciplined curiosity that studying sociology hopefully develops in each of you. Peter Berger reminds us that when we think sociologically, we realise that things are not what they seem. Norbert Elias reminds us that the sociologist is a destroyer of myths. And Zygmunt Bauman tells us that sociology makes the unsayable sayable. And so when we're thinking sociologically, what it really means is that we develop a skill in asking questions about the social arrangements around us and trying to understand them not just as the inevitable effect of natural forces, which cause things to be the way they are. So when we think sociologically, it involves a dismantling of knowledge, a taking apart of what we know before we build it back up. And thinking sociologically is the course theme for 1A, and you'll see that this is a thread that draws across the different topics you'll be covering. And when we think sociologically, we hope to develop a way of understanding the human world that also opens up a possibility for thinking about the same world in different ways. It helps us begin to question those common sense assumptions we have about society, about the way things are. It helps us develop the ability to imagine sympathetically the predicament of another person. And it helps us cultivate an openness to the world and to other ways of thinking and seeing and acting. So where to begin? Well, I think first of all we can begin with this idea of social reality. And when we think about social reality, well, we can understand this as aspects of our lives and experiences, things that happen in the world that we can only adequately explain once we understand that they are born of the fact that humans are inescapably social beings. That is, our lives are not lived in isolation. We work, we play, we act in contexts that are shaped by dense networks of relationships in which we live. Our social existence, it shapes what we can do, how the world seems to us, what things are important or valuable for us, what we consider to be right and wrong, and so forth. So in other words, there is a part of what we call reality that is social. And social reality is what sociology, as a discipline, tries to explore and understand. So thinking sociologically means recognizing and trying to understand the implications of the fact that human beings live social lives and that society defines a kind of reality of its own. It pre-exists any of us. It extends beyond any one of us. Now that might seem self-evident, but just recognizing this very fact and taking it seriously is a key first step to thinking sociologically. And when we think about social reality, we can think about it as having a three-dimensional quality. So first of all, it is microscopic, based around individuals' personal worlds, the mundane, the everyday. It shapes what we do, how we act, but also what we expect of others. And it is simultaneously macroscopic, in that the social structures around us, the organised set of social institutions and institutionalised relationships that compose society, that they impact on people's personal backgrounds and situations. Second, Social reality is historical and contemporary in that present structures and circumstances, events, processes, and issues have a history that may impact on their current form and future development. And thirdly, social reality is both social and political. Society is deeply impacted by the operation of power. And when we are seeing and thinking sociologically, we begin to see these connections. It's like we join the dots between these different dimensions. So let's explore these connections a bit further. C. Wright Mills argued in his book, The Sociological Imagination, that people must understand that they do not exist in a social vacuum of the moment, but that their values, their beliefs, and behaviours are influenced by the particular time and place in which they themselves exist. So it's an awareness of the relationship between the personal experience and wider society. And it draws on this connection and intersection between biography, history, and society. The sociological imagination, then, is an outlook on life that tries to break away from the monotony of day-to-day life, and specifically the sociological imagination involves an individual developing a deep understanding of how their biography is a history of historical processes and occurs within a larger social context. And this is where Mills talks about connecting between personal troubles and public issues. So Mills argued that thinking as a sociologist is about helping ourselves and ordinary people gain an idea of the social structures that affect our lives. Personal troubles are the individual, private, they're often limited in scope. Public issues relate to organisation and institutions of society as a whole. And structural changes occur outside of the specific environment in which we live. And in Mill's view, the promise of a sociological imagination is the ability to integrate the personal and the public, these two spheres of human experience. So how might we do that? Well, let's think about a decision to come to university and what might be the social factors or what institutions might have influenced this seemingly individual decision. So to what degree was your life mapped out or shaped by you, your family background, or the messages you received from school? How has your background shaped this opportunity to come to university, and what messages did you receive from these different representatives from different social structures about the value of education? And consider how, had other social factors been in place, your decision to go to university might have been different. Part of the sociological imagination is to understand how history affects our opportunities. So think about if you were attending university in the 1960s, how likely would you have been to attend university based on your gender, based on your racialized identity, based on your social class? And let's think about some other factors that shape this path to university. Most students know there's a hierarchy of institutions. Often Oxford and Cambridge are seen at the top and some of the so-called new universities at the bottom. Now, for potential students who are more higher education savvy, the choice of which university to go to is an important one. And this is where things like university rankings become very significant. But not all students know about the perceived hierarchies within universities, particularly if they come from families or schools or communities where people generally do not attend university. So for them, the choice is often whether to go to university rather than which one to attend. There's also this question of risk. So for many students who might have come from a non-traditional route to university, higher education choice involves considering potential risks of participation. There's a possibility of failure. There's a financial risk, outlay of tuition fees, loss of potential earnings for the period of study. There's a risk to relationships. Will my friends, my family, my partner, my community still accept me if I become a student? And equally important, if I want to change my life by going to university, will I still want the same people? And what about when we get to university, our embodied experience of being a student? How might this be shaped by biography and history and society? Well, each of us has an embodied type of feel for social situations we regularly find ourselves in. And in the right situations, our feel for the way things are allows us to successfully navigate social environments and contexts and interactions. We just know what to do, and we use our skills to our success in our new social scenarios. But this doesn't just happen or develop in and of itself. We absorb this feel for the game. We absorb it from our family, from communities, from schools, and other influences around us, often through childhood. So we will have different feels for the game that may impact positively or negatively on us in terms of our experience of being at university. Let's think about another example and about going for a job interview, right? Now, if you fail to get a job, how might you usually explain why that happened? Well, quite frequently what we do is we explain that it's maybe due to some personal failing or misjudgment on our own part. I didn't give a good interview. I wasn't sufficiently well qualified or prepared. Or we explain it in terms of some personal attribute of the person who interviewed us. So perhaps they took a dislike to me, or we didn't quite hit it off. There wasn't a connection between us. In other words, we experience life subjectively, so from inside of ourselves. We tend to explain cause and effect not in social terms, but in individual terms. So personal troubles, as Mills might put it. But if we start to look sociologically at the same process, if we step back and look not at one interview as we might personally experience it, but at 100 interviews or 1,000 interviews or 100 job applications or 1,000 job applications, and if we discover, for example, that in a given population of equally qualified candidates, those with, say, a working class accent are significantly less likely to be employed than those who are middle class, or that those who are of a particular ethnicity are less likely to be given a position than other ethnic groups, then a different kind of explanation becomes visible, and this is where it becomes a public issue. Now, this doesn't mean that every one of those decisions is shaped by racism or class prejudice, say. But it does mean that there are patterns and forms of causality in social life which we can't properly recognise when we look at that life only from the point of view of our own specific individual experience. And once we start to recognise those patterns or arrangements, we can start to ask questions about why they exist as they do, who benefits from them, how they came about historically, and so on. And here's another example that we can think about this relationship between the private and the public. If we look at what's happening globally, and particularly what's happening in the West around the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, Black Lives Matter as a movement implies and refers to historical systemic inequality that dates back 400 years, where black people in the States in particular have been relegated as inferior, criminalised, profiled and oppressed. How can we even begin to understand the violent murders and executions of individuals seen as a problem? Names that we recognise: Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, Breonna Taylor. How does it feel to be a problem? Thinking sociologically means we start at our current social reality and looking at this from intersecting angles. So first, the structure of society in which the problem is unfolding. Second, how has a society's history influenced contemporary social and economic problems? What are the historical roots of the problem? And third, the microenvironment biography or biography of an individual. So when we think about social problems, yes, we can say that all people have problems, regardless of wealth or status. It's part of the human condition. We have problems, but to be a problem is something altogether different. To be a problem is to have your own body, your children, your people viewed as a malignant presence in society. Writing in the late 1800s and early 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois, a hugely significant African-American sociologist, and largely left out of what we understand as American sociology, Du Bois asked in the classic text on race in America, in the souls of black folk, how does it feel to be a problem? He predicted the 20th century would be the century of the colour line. He foresaw that race would be the central issue. He could not have foreseen how deeply entrenched racism would still be in the 21st. How does it feel to be a problem? How does it feel to be a racial minority today in the US and in this current moment of presidential elections, face voter suppression laws designed to keep you away from the polls? How does it feel to hear the president declare that there are good people among white nationalist hate groups? How does it feel to be a problem? And thinking sociologically with this question shows us there is no other way in but to connect the personal and the public, and to connect biography, history, and society. Tim May, writing in 2018, describes thinking sociologically as a way of digging into those conditions that inform our everyday actions to provide us with lenses, other ways of seeing the human condition. To think sociologically, we have to develop our sociological imagination. And our sociological imagination is designed to locate the private troubles of people in the social, structural, political, historical context that shapes their struggles and to make public issues out of them. This is what the Black Lives Matter movement, in fact, has come to represent and symbolise. And when we think sociologically, we step back, we look behind, we ask questions. And in doing so, we see patterns that provide different sorts of explanations for social arrangements and raise questions about what space there might be for change. And this is such an important point. And here we can see the statement, sociology is a practice. It is something that you do. And although there are some parts of sociological practice which do take time to learn and get skilled at, research skills, we need training to do those things. Nevertheless, a core part of what you do as a sociologist, of what it means to be a sociologist, is learning to think sociologically about the world. That's a practice, and that's something you can start to do right away. So thinking sociologically is like a conversion of sorts, right? It's being turned back to front and a bit inside out. And it begins with the gradual realization of seeing the world backward. It's this idea that I said at the beginning, a dismantling of knowledge. It's taking apart what we think we know, but building it back up. And a sociological perspective means you get the world given back to you afresh. To awaken those lenses through which we see the world is a magnificent, but also terrible lesson. It can be terrifying and unsettling and upsetting, because it makes it question those taken for granted attitudes we have about the world around us and forces us to question why the world is the way it is. And in this lecture, I really want you to take something away with you, which is to instill in you the need to begin asking questions, to begin questioning the world around you, to develop this disciplined curiosity about all aspects of society. That indeed is the driving force of sociology. And it's useful to note that sociology is a commentary on everyday living, from the mundane, those aspects that go unnoticed, and much of the social is reproduced in those moments, to the greater social upheavals. As we move through this semester, you will, we hope, develop your own patterns for asking questions and understanding the everyday and wider sociological phenomena. And we think that this should be both a liberating and challenging exercise, but one that we urge you to embrace and be open to.